Hi there, my name is Tuomas, this is Sound of Free, and in this video I'm gonna give you my review of the brand new Beach Boys documentary called The Beach Boys, simply. That was released on 24th May 2024 on Disney+. The movie is directed by Frank Marshall. Previously he has done a lot of films. He's a prolific filmmaker, mostly producer. A few years back he directed a pretty good documentary about the Bee Gees, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart. I watched that right when it was released. I enjoyed it. There were some issues with it that I didn't like, and I feel like this one kind of has some of those same issues, but we'll dive into those in the latter part of this video. So this one is going to be a bit lengthy. I want to do a deep dive on this documentary because I've been hyping this up since, I don't know, a year or two ago, because, well, we've known about this documentary for a few years now, because it was part of the deal that the Beach Boys did, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I don't know, something like that, with Irving Azoff and the Iconic Artists group. You know, the Beach Boys basically sold their brand and their legacy, so to speak, to Irving Azoff, and when that deal was made, Irving talked about this in an interview, that he has plans to produce a great documentary about the group, and he's going to produce a tribute show, and you know, so on, so on. So we've had the tribute show, now we've had the documentary. First, I'm going to kind of give a little introduction shortly, just to let you know what kind of fan I am and what I was hoping for from this documentary, because I think these are important aspects to know about me, the reviewer in this case, just so you sort of know where I'm coming from. I've been a fan of the Beach Boys since, I don't know, 2010 or so about 15 years. I'm a pretty hardcore fan. I've met the living members, and I've spent a huge chunk of my student loan to travel to see them and meet them. So I'm a huge fan. I'm not a Mike Love hater. I'm not a Brianista. I'm a fan of everybody. I'm a fan of the music mainly. And I'm not a fan because of nostalgia. I fell in love with the music, the artistry, and the way it touched my soul, so to speak. It just felt really personal from the first time I heard some of the deep cuts and so on. Obviously, I always knew from a child, I cannot remember hearing the first time songs like Wouldn't It Be Nice or I don't know, some tunes, Sloop John B or God Only Knows. I cannot really recall hearing those the first time, because they've been used in movies, etc. many times, so I've known them all my life. But anyway, so I just don't have a sort of nostalgic attachment to the music. So when I went to see the Brian Wilson shows in Europe or the Mike Love shows in Europe, I saw that the audiences on both were very different, and it seemed to me that in the Mike Love shows there was a lot of older people who went there with their Hawaiian shirts, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying it's a different type of fandom. And the Beach Boys, because of their longevity and their huge discography, they just have so huge amount of fans, varied with different tastes and different ages. So anyway, I saw a lot of people who went to the shows for nostalgia. They did not sing along with Wild Honey. They did not. I doubt they even had heard it. When Mike's group was playing songs like All I Wanna Do, the audience, yeah, they clapped respectfully, but they didn't, you know, shout woo or anything. But when Brian was doing Heroes and Villains, everybody went crazy, and the audience was a lot younger. And sure, there's also a lot of those people, older people, who go for nostalgia too in a Brian Wilson show, and he performs those classic hits too, those early 60s car songs and stuff like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's not like my I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm just saying that there are different fans within the fandom. So I just feel that I'm more into the sort of, because I'm a younger fan, I don't have that nostalgia attachment to them. I come from a little bit different point of view. I guess my kind of point over here is that people see the group and the music and they feel it in different ways. For some people, they don't care about the melancholic stuff or the, so to speak, hardcore, deep, sort of introspective music that Brian or Dennis did. They just want to hear Barbara Ann and have a good time, and that's all right. That's all right. But even within the group themselves, they have always been divided with what the group should be about and what the music should be about. And, you know, there's always this sort of constant pulling of sides. There's always been that within the group, within the fandom, and, you know, it is just what it is. But to me, it was pretty obvious that the director, in this case, in this documentary's case, was only interested in the early period and the Endless Summer compilation. And that was pretty much it. But we'll dive into it in a minute. Let's start off with the goods. Well, first of all, well, my hopes. Let's talk about that before that. I have quite a lot of notes over here. Well, I didn't really expect a lot from this documentary. I've seen all of the previous documentaries made of them, including the Brian Wilson documentaries, Beautiful Dreamer, great one by David Leaf, I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, made by Don Was, who was interviewed in this one too, Long Promised Road, American Family, Endless Harmony, and a lot of those TV documentaries too. I think I've seen all of them pretty much. So I wasn't hoping or expecting to learn anything new from this one. I knew that they were not gonna talk about adult child, so I wasn't like expecting anything like that. I was hoping to see some new live footage, some like song performances that we haven't seen in a video format, in a film format from the 60s or early 70s. I guess we probably had like 5 seconds of that, but not really. Mostly everything archival was just old footage that was restored, which was a bummer, but we'll talk about more of that later too. There was a lot of cool stuff too, but I was disappointed in that sense. There really wasn't new live footage over there, which was a shame, big shame. But yeah, that was like one thing. And then I was really hyped up for the Paradise Cove reunion, because Al was talking about that very excitedly last year already, and I made a video about that, how they got together and sang a cappella songs on the beach. And we even saw glimpses of that in a preview, I don't know, a few weeks ago. And there was like more footage of that reunion in that preview than the actual documentary, and they actually cut off the dialogue completely from that scene, and they didn't show the singing, nothing. So that was kind of a bummer. But like mainly, I was just hoping for a cinematic, basic telling of the story, the main story of the Beach Boys in a, you know, cinematic style for the first time, because the Beach Boys have not got that yet. Some people would probably say that, well, American Family and Endless Harmony did that, but they are more like made for TV documentaries. They don't have that cinematic aesthetic, not to even like mention the 2000s like documentary style. I mean, documentaries have come a long way, and the Beach Boys never got that kind of treatment. Brian has got that sort of treatment with his Long Promised Road documentary a few years back, sort of, and so on. And the Pet Sounds documentary was great too, which was released, I don't know, 8 years ago or something like that. But that's it. So that was just my main hope, that the story, the great story of the Beach Boys, which by the way is impossible to tell in 2 hours. I know that, I realize that. But just the main parts, the main points of it would be told in a cool cinematic way, in an honest way, with some new footage, some new restored performance live, you know, stuff, with new interviews and great visuals, great soundtrack. I was really hoping for a cool soundtrack with this one, with some sort of, you know, outtakes, live performances, previously unreleased stuff, some sort of physical release. I was really hyping up for that. And just in general, just a good basic documentary, which would be cool to show to people that don't really know about the Beach Boys yet, because it's kind of hard to pull out the like the Endless Harmony documentary. It's a great documentary, about 2 hours long, but it's just kind of outdated with its visuals and stuff. So it's kind of like, it's just not that sort of a thing that would really get younger people excited about, which is a shame because it's a great documentary. But so that was sort of, I was just so excited when they announced that it was going to be distributed by Disney Plus. So, by the way, some people will say, well, it's a Disney documentary, so what were you expecting? It's not a Disney documentary, it was just distributed by Disney. So that's one thing. We knew about this documentary long before it was produced, I believe, by Irving's, I don't know, people. So it was like an ordered documentary, part of the sort of like cementing the legacy deal. And Disney just came around to be later on the game as the distributor for the documentary. They didn't have anything to do with the making of it. So there's that. But anyway, like those were just the main points. I wasn't expecting anything new or anything like that. But it just, well, let's just go into the goods and bads. Let's start off with the goods. Brian was in the beginning. There was like, I don't know, 5 seconds of him, and he looked amazing. Like for his age, he looked so freaking charismatic and cool. His hair is still great, and it was great to see in that, that high resolution. He was in a close-up, and I can't really remember what he said, because he really said only in, I don't know, a few words, but he was just so cool, and I loved that part. That was so great, and I was like, wow, this is gonna be really good. But that was all. We didn't see Brian at all after that one. I was like, what? Okay, but anyway. But in general, just the new interviews were really good. I especially enjoyed Al's contributions. Al is a great storyteller when it comes to his career and the Beach Boys, because he's always kind of been the outsider. He's part of the family, but not really. So he's always kind of been this sort of outsider within the group. Insider, but he's sort of like, when he's telling his point of view, he's always honest. He's just this sort of no-nonsense kind of guy, and I really love that about him. He's a great storyteller, and he is not afraid of talking about difficult things either. So I don't know, I really genuinely loved his contributions in this documentary. But also Don Randy was great to see. He is so sharp still, and he did just good contributions overall. I loved that. And Marilyn, Brian's first wife, was a big part of this one too, and I really love that, because she's always been kind of, I mean, she was right there, and she's memory is great, and she knew them personally really close. So I think she's the kind of person that is able and was able to bring in some sort, like a different sort of approach, being Brian's wife and being at the center of everything personally. So she's always been great when she gives interviews about the Beach Boys and Brian. About over here especially, she was really great. I really loved her stories. And also David Marks was included, which was amazing, because he's usually completely left out. So it's great. He's even on the poster with this surfboard. I love that. And he got to tell his usual story, but still it was nice that he was included. And also Blondie Chaplin was, I believe, included the first time ever in a Beach Boys documentary with a brand new interview like that. Like, he is very rarely interviewed when it comes to these things, and the era when Blondie and Ricky was part of the group is my, I don't know, probably favorite or second favorite era of the group. The music that they did is so amazing. it stood the test of time, and yeah, it's just gaining more and more appreciation as the years go by. So I loved it that they included him too. I just wish that Ricky was interviewed as well. But anyway, it was great he was included, so you know, that's a big plus. The visuals were mostly great, though I felt that a lot of the best visuals were in the beginning, because there was like these cool shots that they had done with these single picture sleeves on a wall, and it was lit amazingly, and you could see like Child of Winter and like these deep cuts on the wall, and the camera was floating around. It was done really beautifully. But then like kind of like after that, slowly it sort of just started to use these sort of more cheap you know, let's just zoom into a picture that's on a After Effects table, kind of like. So I don't know what really happened with that. And then there was even like a few images that were like Googled, basically. Like the image quality was, I don't know, like 300 pixels. So it was kind of weird when they show a film photograph, which is clearly just taken out of Google, when they could have just searched for the actual, you know, the negative. But probably the reason for those were probably the fact that in the editing stage, they searched those images off of Google and then added them on the timeline in the edit, and they were going to switch them to the originals, you know, the negatives, the higher resolution images, but then they forgot to do that. There was like, I don't know, 1 or 2 situations like that where I was like, that looks kind of really bad. So those kind of took me off. For the most part, the visuals were really good and kind of like what I was expecting. And I really loved the way they lit the interview scenes. The early days were all like, when it comes to the storytelling and the content of the documentary itself, the early days were very well told. Like completely, like I loved that first, I don't know, first hour or so of the documentary. That was really well done. And I loved it how it included a lot of stuff with Murray too, because he was super important for the group, and I loved it that they didn't just make him a villain. They did tell some ugly, truthful stories about him in it, which like the abusive stories, which I was kind of expecting that they would cut off, but I was really happy to see that they didn't. And they also just didn't make him a villain. They also told about, like, Murray has always been to me this sort of sympathetic guy, even like after all the bad things that he did. I don't know, there's something really sad about his character too. So I was happy to see that he was probably like the most fledged like person in this whole documentary, to be honest. Like when it comes to the characterization of the actual members of the group, I felt it was very lacking. Excluding maybe Dennis. Dennis got his due really in this one when it comes to the, at least like the younger Dennis. They didn't really dive into his music, but like these hobbies and his persona, I really think that they did a good job with that. But when it comes to like Carl, they really didn't, like Carl's persona just didn't come through at all in this documentary, not to mention Al, Bruce, David, even Blondie, or Mike, or, you know, like, well, Mike maybe a little bit, but like, they just didn't really use time at all to try to showcase their personas, which I found kind of interesting. And especially with Brian, it was like, I think Brian is such an interesting character. He is so, you know, dimensional, super complicated guy. And in this one, he just seemed so one-sided. So that was like, that was lackluster for me. But anyway, more of the goods. Glenn Campbell was included. I loved his part. He got, I don't know, maybe like a few minutes at least. So that was great. And there was a lot of funny moments, especially in the first section, like first half or so. Many little moments that made me kind of laugh a little bit, and I really enjoyed those. I cannot really recall now exactly what moments, but like little snippets of interviews and some video clips and stuff. Those were great. Though I gotta mention, like, this documentary had like the most awkward thing ever with them describing how great frontman Mike Love is, and they showed, out of all performances, a Long Tall Texan, which is like the most awkward thing ever. It just, it was so cringy. I was like, come on, like, I personally think Mike can be really great performer, really cool and charismatic, but like, come on, Long Tall Texan. It's probably the worst performance that they ever did, like on any song live. So I was like, oh my God, it was so embarrassing. And I was also happy, to be honest, that they included Charles Manson, because I was sure that they were gonna cut him out and that part completely. But I think they did a really good job with describing in like 5 minutes the whole thing. And I was really happy to see that for the first time ever that I've heard of, Mike actually talked about the situation from Dennis' point of view, because he always has seemed to be just like so unsympathetic towards Dennis about the Manson thing. And here he truly just seemed really honest about, like, when he was talking about how that whole thing must have been hard for Dennis. And it just, I was like, wow, did you really say that? Because that's literally the first time I've heard him talk anything nice or sort of like sympathetic about Dennis and his issues, like ever. Usually when he's asked about Dennis, he starts to ramble on Summer in Paradise and John Stamos. So it was like, wow, did you really just say that? And that was a touching moment for sure. And I really liked it that they included it, because it happened. It's a big part in history, and the Beach Boys were right in the center of it. So it has to be a part of their story. And a little bit more about the visuals too. I really loved all the restored footage. There was a ton of restored film clips and, you know, like video stuff, especially the 15 Big One special. It's called on DVD. Let me show it to you. This Good Vibrations tour, but it's actually the sort of the 15 Big Ones Brian's Back TV special made in 1976. So there was like outtakes from the interviews from this one, which was, it was so great to see them in higher definition, and it just made me so happy that, wow, maybe one day we could see those full, like those tapes, those full tapes, the interview in the Prada studio with Dennis and Carl. There were like clips over here that I haven't seen anywhere else. And yeah, I mean, they must have shot a ton of footage, by the way, for that TV documentary. I would love to see that restored someday, and they could even like make it longer, you know, sort of like the Get Back thing with the Beatles. They could really like make a, I don't know, a 2-hour thing out of that one. Anyway, so, you know, I was just like, there were these little snippets that was just so great to see in high def. And I really enjoyed the fact that they didn't do that sort of Get Back, that Peter Jackson hobbitization of the footage, which was my, like, a big criticism for me about the Get Back thing, that Peter Jackson just destroyed that, in my opinion, he destroyed that beautiful film grain, that beautiful film footage. It was, to me, it was so hard to watch that, because the content itself was amazing, the Beatles one. But I just couldn't get past the fact that the image looked so artificial and so weird, so plasticky. So, you know, I was so glad that they didn't do that route over here, but just stuck with the sort of the cinematic way of showcasing that beautiful film grain footage, that grainy film footage, that's fabulous. Honestly, and like proudly, and so I was like super happy with that. But just a shame was that the fact that those were just little snippets. Really, I'd say like 1/3 or 1/4 of this documentary is just still like these kind of boring one-shot frames of people talking. And they literally just shot those interviews with one camera, with one angle, and that was it. So like, I don't know, 1/3 probably of this documentary is just those. And you see all those frames in like the first 5 minutes, and then they just repeat, repeat, repeat. So that was like kind of dumb. and then there's a lot of just basic stock footage. And then there's a lot of those sort of, let's pan to a image on a timeline. It was like, come on, really. Really kind of boring, lame, lazy filmmaking partially. But, you know, it is what it is, you know. I'm gonna be honest. So anyway, from here, let's dive into the bad. I have a lot over here, and I might sound harsh. I'm kind of I'm not sorry about that. I'm gonna be honest over here, but I really wanted to love this one. I really wanted to give it a, you know, 2 thumbs up and be super happy, but, you know, it is what it is. I'm gonna be honest over here. Literally, Brian was in it like 5 seconds, and sure, he's all over it with the archival footage, old interview snippets and stuff, but it kind of bothered me that most of his interviews, I think they actually come from the, maybe like the Endless Harmony, I'm not sure, I can't recall, but like some interview that's like probably the most used interview of Brian, where I think he's sitting at the piano, and that interview has been showcased in so many documentaries. And there's so, like, Brian was interviewed for hours for the Long Promised Road documentary, just this one, just a few years back, 5 years back or so. And there's tons of unused footage for this one. So why didn't they ask Brent Wilson, hey, dude, would you like to participate? Send us the footage. You know, like, what? Come on, really? I think it would have been better to see the older Brian reminiscent with the other guys about his past, because with the Long Promised One documentary, he goes through his story just as usual, you know, tells funny old stories of all kinds of things, and talks about Holland album, Jack Riley, Carl, recording process, a lot of cool things. And so it was kind of like, to me, it felt lazy that they just used mostly that one interview. And I gotta mention this one briefly too, even though it's not part of the documentary, but I think you can kind of see this attitude from the filmmaker, kind of in the way the film was edited, and kind of like how the story was told at the end. A few weeks back, Frank Marshall gave this interview about the movie, and he just mocked Brian completely in his comments, saying that he fried his brain and he was a lousy man to interview and stuff like that. I'm just paraphrasing over here, but it was like, what? Like, come on! Like, I just was so disgusted by those comments, and I was like, oh man, like, and I think this, at the end of the day, like, this documentary kind of doesn't understand Brian, like, at all. It doesn't even try to understand Brian or his music, and it doesn't even talk about his mental problems, which is really weird. And it cuts off completely, pretty much, the whole, you know, the drug usage. It doesn't talk about Landy's treatment, anything. Like, it's so strange. Like, the way they characterize Brian over here is so strange and out of place, to me at least. It felt really weird. And with those comments by the director promoting the film, it kind of made sense to me that he just didn't get him, like, at all. And that's why Mike is the main storyteller and the main voice in this documentary. But anyway, let's move on. The talking heads overall in this movie, I felt, didn't really bring much to the table. Like, there were a few guys that I cannot even recall their names. I have no idea who they are. I know Lindsey Buckingham, and I know Janelle Monáe, and I thought she was actually, like, a good one to be there, because she actually collaborated with Brian a few years back. So it's like, okay, that makes sense. And Lindsey Buckingham, yeah, has collaborated with Brian too, so that kind of makes sense too. I just thought there was just way too much stuff with them. And the other people, the other random talking heads, just like, it just didn't really bring anything to it. So why even include them? And then they cut off people like Bobby Figueroa, which was like so weird. You know, the longtime drummer for the Beach Boys touring group. They interviewed him, but they cut him off. So, like, whatever, you know, just weird. I also had a problem with the soundtrack, which is kind of weird because I love the music, but it just was underwhelming, really. There was a lot of tracks that they chose not to even talk about. Like, I don't think they even mentioned Surfer Girl. They didn't mention Do It Again. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. They didn't mention anything post Smiley Smile, basically. So it's just so strange. But like, the only part that I can really remember that was, I thought they used the music really well with the image, that was like, kind of almost got me into goosebumps, was at the end with the, I think it was the backing track with the background vocals of A Day in the Life of a Tree of Surf's Up album, and they used that with some cool audience clips and stuff. Like, that was a beautiful moment at the end, and that was a sort of like, that was something that I was hoping for more from the documentary. There was also a little snippet where they sort of showcased the, I think it was maybe Don't Worry Baby. They just brought in the background harmonies, and they had video clips of like Mike and the different members singing. They sort of like faded in and out those images, so you could see who's singing where. And I thought that was a great way to visually showcase the harmony singing, which is really hard to do in a literature, like written word, or not to mention even in a movie. That's always sort of a difficult task, in my opinion, to showcase that so that a general viewer would understand what they're actually like talking about. So that scene was great. I didn't like the fact that this one just keeps on spreading the old myths, like wrongful myths of Pet Sounds. Once again, they tell the story of how Pet Sounds was a huge departure for them, and that's why it failed. And it's like, wait, like what? But that's not actually what happened. If you go and listen to their discography, the music that they start on recording with the Surfing Safari and how it leads up to Pet Sounds, it's very gradual. It's very organic. If you listen to albums like Surfer Girl, it already has those parts, those snippets, and that element that you can then hear kind of like fully on Pet Sounds. You listen to All Summer Long in 64, Today, 65. Today is a complete Pet Sounds 0.1. Like, it's so similar to Pet Sounds. And Mike Love wrote the lyrics for Today with Brian. So it's like, I mean, it's cool that they had Tony Asher here and talked about his lyrics, but I hate it when they say that Tony brought in these new kind of lyrics, because that's not true. Mike already did that with Today and some of the other tracks also previously. Those sort of introspective, more grown-up themes, like those sort of more major themes. So it wasn't like Mike did the surf lyrics, and it kind of actually bummed me too, because they said that Mike wrote all the car songs in the documentary. I was like, well, but how about Gary Usher? I don't know. It just was kind of weird. But anyway, and then when we get to the Smile section, this is what, like right at the end of the documentary, because after the Pet Sounds part and Smile, they just fast forward in, like, I don't know, it seemed like 10 minutes or so until Today. It was a weird experience to see. It felt so rushed, But the way they describe Smile over here is criminal. First of all, Van Dyke Parks comes off as this huge buffoon. Like, his lyrics are ridiculed over here. And the whole music and the whole, like, they don't even try to explain what was the idea behind Smile. They just make it seem like it was some sort of acid trip thing that was more suitable for Brian but not for the Beach Boys, and it was a failure, and that was it. They never talk about the legend of Smile or the release of Smile in 2004 or the release of Smile Sessions or the Grammys that Brian won for them, like the resurgence, like none of that. They don't even, and the same thing goes really with all of Brian's music and the Beach Boys music over here. What really bothered me throughout was that they don't at all try to they just have these talking heads saying that the music is amazing, the music is great, and so on. But they don't even try to explain what makes it great. So it's like, what? Like, if I was just a casual listener, I would like to know about what actually makes it great. I personally know what makes it great, but I think it would have been cool to have somebody playing with a guitar or a piano or whatever, you know, showcasing like Philip Lambert did in the Brian Wilson songwriter documentary. I'm not saying that the whole thing should be about that. I'm just saying that there should be like one scene with Don Was or somebody like playing or, you know, taking apart a tune and being like, hey, like there's this sort of thing that's very unusual, and then there's this chord structure or these key changes. Like, explain in words what actually makes a song great or what makes the production great. There was none of that. So it's like, well, if you're not a fan of the Beach Boys, you are not gonna, like, this documentary is not gonna change your mind, basically. Because it doesn't even try to do that or, you know, tell you what actually is great about them. Which was like, okay, that's one way to go, I guess. I'm just gonna fast forward with all of this because this is gonna be a 2-hour video. If I read everything, I'm gonna fast forward until the end, just like the documentary did. So anyway, it was just a huge bummer that everything after Pet Sounds was glossed over completely. It truly just does not help the legacy at all, and it's weird because in the last few years, there's been a huge resurgence of the late 60s and the 70s stuff with the box sets and everything, and younger fans really love that stuff. So it's like, well, we want to hear about that stuff because, for the most part, especially because that part has always kind of been glossed over in documentaries. So it's like, I was kind of hoping that we'd get at least something about those. Here's something about Love You here, and the way it influenced basically synth pop, but like nothing. There was nothing. I knew they were not gonna talk about Adult Child. I knew that, but like, come on, like, there's nothing about the Brian's Back era. There's nothing about the 80s. They start to fast forward things after the release of Endless Summer, and the only thing they bring up, like before 2023 September, when they have the reunion at the beach, which is 5 seconds long, the only thing they talk about that like 50-year period, like 49-year period, the only thing that they bring up is Mike talking about the lawsuit and how he was a genius too for writing those lyrics. It's like, is that really the most important thing out of those 40, 50 freaking years? Like, and the funny thing about this one is that Mike is very prominent on it, and I'm a big Mike fan. I love his contributions to the Beach Boys. I met the guy, he's great, I'm a fan of his. But he can come off as a sort of, well, Brian said it best, he's egotistical. He's kind of hard to sometimes to be around with. And you can see that side of him in a lot of interviews and clips. And over here, for the most part, I enjoyed him. I thought he was very respectful. But then there are these parts where they try to create this sort of Mike loves a genius too thing. And it's mainly done by Mike himself. They bring that up in the documentary a few times, and it's like, this is not really helping. It really makes you, Mike, it really makes you sound like Murray over here. So it's like, I don't know, it was just interesting to include those pieces to me. I don't know, maybe I'm alone with this one, but it was strange. Anyway, like last night after seeing the documentary, this anxiety started to build in my head when I was like laying in my bed. Truly, I couldn't sleep last night because of the documentary. I got this headache, this huge anxiety. Not because the documentary was so bad. I enjoyed it. I truly did enjoy it a lot. But I just realized that this was most likely the last big, like cinematic documentary. This was it. This was the last chance to get a truly great documentary of the group, cinematic. Sort of like crowd-pleasing, this sort of mainstream documentary spread by Disney, like spread to big audience. Let's tell the story of the untold story of the Beach Boys, you know, with the good and the bad, in a cinematic, great way. Showcase the music and the artistry, and this is what we get. And I just started to get this anxiety, this headache. I was like, oh my god, like. I personally don't think this is a documentary that a new fan or a dude, you know, or a person that doesn't know about the Beach Boys should watch. I don't think so, because it is so, it's not even 1/10 of the story, first of all. And it spreads wrongful myths, and it's very one-sided. And well, the early days section is very well told, but everything kind of after that falls apart, in my opinion. And if you don't know the story, you're gonna get a lot of weird impressions, wrong impressions on things with this one. And I feel the reason for that is that Frank Marshall just doesn't really know about the story. He said it himself. He didn't have any idea how influential the Beach Boys were before making this documentary. So that says something already. So it's like he knew about the hits. He knew about Endless Summer, the '74 compilation. He grew up with that stuff, and that was what he cared about. That early days glory, that 60s nostalgia. And that's the story of the movie. Not the art, not the personal lives, even not the people themselves, not the way they did the music, not the productions, like none of that. So it's like, to me, the story of the Beach Boys is multi-dimensional. It's huge. It's almost like its own cinematic universe. And I get that. You cannot take that and do that in a movie. I know that. I included some really weird things too, like the useless Vietnam flashback. It's like, what does this have to do with anything, really? And at the end, when they started to talk about the nostalgia thing and the Endless Summer compilation, I was expecting them to bring up the American Graffiti film, because that was a big thing. That was a big factor in the fact why Endless Summer was such a big hit. But no, they didn't mention that one. No, that was kind of strange too. But anyway, I guess they were kind of running out of minutes at that point. But it's weird because it was on a streaming platform. It's not a movie theater experience. So why couldn't it be 2 hours and 30 minutes? Or a series, like a 3-part series. Bon Jovi just got a great documentary series about them, which was superior to this one. Wham got a great documentary last year, which was superior to this one. It's like, the Beach Boys really deserves a great documentary, don't you think? Like they are basically the biggest, most influential band that came in the 20th century out of the States, and they always just get bummed out. I don't know. It's sad. But anyway, thanks for watching. See you on the next one. What did you think about the film? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Let's continue in the comment section. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye bye.